Alright, we made the hour-and-a-half trek back to Iron Prodigy Gym to train legs today. And I always start my leg training by training abs first. One of the main reasons for this is due to my chronic lower back issues. I feel that getting blood into my midsection, warming up my abs, increasing flexibility to my lower back and hips is a great way to decrease the risk of injury when I go to train legs. Here we're doing a rope crunch, which is probably my favorite ab exercise. One of the problems that I have with training abs these days, which I think is primarily due to the PHN or nerve damage I got from shingles 14 years ago, is I struggle to feel my abs work evenly from left to right. I tend to feel my abs working more on the right because I have nerve damage on the left. When I do an exercise like rope crunch here, I'm able to shift my hips or my shoulders to be able to compensate if I happen to feel it a little bit more on the right side. And it depends on the day. I can go a handful of weeks and it'll feel even. Then I'll go a couple weeks where it feels like it's hitting the right side of my abs harder than the left. And at least with this exercise, I'm able to make those adjustments by not being locked into a machine so that I feel the stress evenly left to right. Here's what I call the astronaut ab machine. I'm not even sure why I call it that, other than it looks like I'm sitting in an astronaut seat ready to be ejected from a module or something. I don't really know. I've never used a piece like this before. It's a unique piece. Again, Chris runs down old school and very unique pieces for his gym, so he thought he'd give it a shot. Not only does it rotate left to right so that you have to balance, what is that, horizontally, but also locks your feet in, your hips are locked in, and obviously it's just a crunch, seated crunch machine, or seated crunch movement. There's a lot of swivel you can see right there in the top part of this machine. If I have to be hypercritical, and I am quite OCD when it comes to machines these days, there is a lot more movement to try to balance out this top part of the machine than I would like. You can't see it, but where you put your feet, that had some give to it as well. Typically with my ab workouts, I'll start with a rope crunch, then I'll go to some other form of random crunch machine, and then I finish up with what I call more of a compound ab exercise, like we're doing bent leg lifts here for the abs. This also helps to get my quads and hips that much more ready or prepared for the leg session that's coming. After training abs, but before training legs, I do hit calves. One of the main reasons for that is, no, they are not a weak point. They're actually quite strong because I worked my ass off for them for about 12 years back in the 90s. When I started training calves, you needed calves to stand on stage. People would actually lose shows if they had a great physique but shitty calves. By the time I got good calves, they didn't matter anymore. There was some shift there in the 90s at some point where the judges must have gotten together over a couple beers and a burger and said, well, we really just don't give a shit about calves anymore. Because these days, you can have a great physique, shitty calves, and win shows. Just on principle alone, I think that having great calves just balances out a physique, especially lower body. Plus, I've got real pretty looking calves, so I want to keep them. It's difficult to find a standing calf machine in a lot of gyms these days. Franchise gyms, like your 24 hours and things like that, they just don't have this piece anymore. I'm not even real sure why. I brought it up to a couple gyms and asked them if they were going to get one, and their response is, well, you can go do calf raises on the Smith machine, or something ridiculous or to that effect. This piece is also rare and is a much better option than the old school option of having your training partner sit on your back and rest his sweaty balls on you while you do donkey calf raises. Most of you probably know, watching this piece was pretty popular and was in a lot of gyms, if not most, through the 90s. Since then, they've become increasingly rare, and you don't come across this machine very often. Moving now to the seated calf raise. This one's just a little bit different because of the cable connection. In fact, I don't think I've ever used a cable connected or a weight stack seated calf raise before. I don't know that it was much different, other than it was much easier to get in and out of without feeling like you were going to get caught not getting the weight high enough to get the lever underneath the bar. This is one of those exercises that you always want a spotter for when you're using a regular seated calf, or you'll end up not being able to lock the weight out or get it up high enough to be able to get the lever underneath it. You're just going to be shit out of luck. I don't know if you can notice in the video yet, but the crowd is starting to thin. It's coming up on 10 o'clock, or getting close to 10 o'clock. We will end up moving very quickly through our quad and ham session because I know I'm racing the clock for when they close. About 3/4 of the way through our leg and ham session, the guy came back and told us we could stay as long as we wanted to because we knew Chris, and Chris knew we were there videotaping. I had to laugh. I was like, why didn't you say something maybe a half hour ago? I'm about ready to die from my heart exploding because I'm tachycardia trying to hurry up and get through this session. Getting my squat shoes on here. I'm not going to squat, free weight squat today, but these shoes are... the main reason I use these shoes is for my lower back. One of the things that I revisited in my training over the last couple years was I used to go old school back in the day, and we would elevate our heels when we squatted by putting plates on the floor. And then you put your heels on the plates, and that keeps you kind of more in a bodybuilding upright position when you squat, forcing more of the stress towards the quads and a little bit less off the glutes and hips. I'm not real sure why bodybuilding moved away from that. The argument may have been that it was hard on the knees or something to that effect. I've got a bad back, so I would probably rather transfer a little bit more vulnerability to my knees than I would my lower back. So I tried putting plates on the floor and squatting that way, and it just felt a little bit awkward because you were locked into where those plates were, and if they may happen to move, that's not always great either. So I looked into elevated heel shoes, Olympic powerlifting shoes, and came across what I think was a godsend, and that are these Nike, I think you call them Romeleros or something like that. Anyway, they're Nike's version of a squat shoe. They're a couple $100, but they're worth every penny because it's almost the equivalent of gluing your foot to the floor or to the ground. Even when I'm not free squatting, I still use them, much like I'm using them on this exercise here, to keep my heels elevated, which I feel guards my lower back a little bit more by not allowing the poor flexibility in my hamstrings to pull my hips underneath me. One of the main reasons that I injured my lower back to begin with and continue to injure it is because of poor flexibility, not only through my hamstrings, but hip flexors, piriform, and psoas, you name it. And when my hips would turn under me, I would pop a essentially a disc and end up with a bulging or herniated disc. And that has happened, if you count the major herniations, it is exactly 10. The cool thing is I haven't had a major herniation in 3.5 years due to my stretching and chiropractic protocol that I will detail in the stretching and chiropractic chapters. We started off with this exercise primarily because it's safe. When it comes to my leg training these days, I choose exercises based on almost cost to benefit, or how safe they are, or whether they put my lower back in a vulnerable position. The leaner I am, the more I can get away with when I train legs and not have my back being as vulnerable of a position. The heavier I am, the bigger my gut is, the more risk I have for injuring my lower back. There was a point where I said anytime I was over 220, I was at risk of injuring my lower back, because 9 out of the 10 times I was over that weight. And because of the injury that I have, or was dealing with, where my hips turn under me and almost stretched the lower back too far, your gut gets in the way and it almost leverages your lower back. It's much like if you put a twig or a branch behind your knee when you squat. You can imagine the stress that it would put on the front of the knee. Leverage, because that branch or that twig would leverage or increase the leverage at the knee, or the stress. So I choose exercises these days based on whether I can stay more upright. As an example, there is no way on this earth I would be able to perform even one repetition with an old school vertical leg press. I would blow at least one disc and possibly two, and there would be spine jelly all over the wall. Notice my feet are up pretty much as high as they can go in front of me. That makes the movement a little bit more pendulum-esque, if you will, in the sense that I push out and away and it's in an arc motion as opposed to just straight up and down. We're going to move over to leg extensions here. With my OCD that I brought up before, one of the things that I cannot stand about leg extension or leg curls is when a pad comes from one side. At least here the connection is in the middle, and I feel that it's more balanced. We're going to go to the leg curl here in a moment, and you'll see it's one of the leg curls that I don't like because the pad comes from one side, and because of my OCD-ness, I can tell that it's not perfectly straight. At least with this machine here. Strive makes great pieces of, or great machines, pieces of equipment anyway. But this one comes from the middle and it feels more balanced. I'm not one of those hold them at the top, squeeze them at the top kind of guys when it comes to leg extensions. I used to be in my younger years. These days, I don't complicate what I think is a very simple issue. I stop the movement in the bottom to try to take a little bit of momentum out of there, but I'm pretty quick. I get a good squeeze at the top, but I'm not doing anything fancy here. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. I also typically load Strive machines at the bottom. Doesn't matter if it's a preacher curl, doesn't matter if it's a leg extension or a leg curl. I feel that I would rather have the stretch position be easier and not put my knees or elbows in a vulnerable position and let that stress increase as the muscle contracts. 10-15. I typically train relatively late. Moving here to the leg curl that I was talking about. Notice how the pad comes from one side. This one was pretty smooth, and it actually felt relatively even. And when I say relatively even, I've used some bad pieces that are just, by the time you get to that outside of the pad, it's 3/4 of an inch off. My brain works in situations like that where I feel like one leg is going to develop differently than the other. Whether that's true or not, it may not be the case, but psychologically that's how I always look at it. Plus I always look at it as you're making a piece of exercise equipment, why in the hell can't you make it even from left to right? It doesn't make any sense. If I made exercise equipment, it would be badass and it would be even and it would be awesome. Moving here to the leg press, I had not used an alternating leg press until I trained at Iron Prodigy, and I got to tell you, these things are a godsend. You got to keep in mind that with my lower back issues, I'm constantly looking for variety in my leg movements, and at the same time that I want that variety, I'm still limited with what I can do, because depending, it's not even the exercise sometimes that is the reason that I can't do it, it's the angle. As an example, these days, modern leg presses are too steep. And by that I mean the platform versus the backrest is too steep, and it puts you in too much of an upright position that with someone like myself, with the injury that I have to my lower back, it's just an accident waiting to happen. This particular piece of equipment, the platform versus the backrest, is at what I call an open angle. It's not too tight, it doesn't have you too upright. Plus, this piece will either lock in as one unit so that you can press them both like any other leg press, or you can unlock it so that it's an isolateral, one leg at a time type of thing. It wasn't until I used this piece that I realized how much weaker my left quad and hip and glute was. So using this piece over the course of a year, a little bit over a year, has allowed me to balance out the strength in my left and right leg and hip and glute and hamstring. And I think we can all agree that that helps my lower back to not be in as much of a vulnerable position. Think about it. If you're free squatting and you're busting your ass and you're coming out of the hole and you've got one leg that's weaker than the other, that's putting your knees, your ankles, your lower back, it's putting everything in an awkward, uneven position. When you have balanced strength from left to right, or balanced development left to right, you're less likely to have a vulnerability in your lower back or in your knees or in your ankles. Keep in mind too, and I understand that it may be the sound that I'm justifying my lack of leg size here, and maybe I am, but when this video was shot, I was only back to 100% on my legs for about 4 or 5 months. I had not had an injury to my lower back in quite a while prior to that, but keep in mind that just because you don't have an injury or a recent injury to your lower back, it still is on your brain constantly when you train legs. So it took me quite a while to build that confidence back up to be able to start hitting legs hard. So this footage here is within the first handful of months when I was starting to build that confidence and really felt like I could start hitting my legs hard again without thinking that my lower back was going to blow on me at any minute. Moving here to the last movement for legs, and that is the lunge. I don't think you're going to see the rep sequence here, but you may look at this video and think, well, wait a minute, he's doing all of his reps on one leg and then all of his reps on the other leg like he said that he does not like to do. Kinda. What I do here for my rep sequence is what I call 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And that is I will start with 5 on the left, then I will do 5 on the right, then I will do 4 on the left, 4 on the right, 3, 2, 1 all the way down with no rest, and that's one set. Again, I don't prefer to do all of my repetitions for a set one leg at a time. So with something like lunges, it's not as practical to go left, 1 rep right, 1 rep left, 1 rep, and repeat that process because it's incredibly time consuming, and you get a little bit of rest in between every repetition because you're trying to get your foot position correct before you start your descent. Doing it this way is kind of a compromise, if you will. And we're done.